Hello friends, welcome to today's demo. Today I wanted to talk about quick watercolor techniques. And the reason why is because I've actually had a number of people ask me, what do you have ideas for just really quick, just really basic watercolors? And so I decided to just share some ideas of when I do quick watercolors and some of the things that I do. So I'm just going to start out with just something really basic here. And let me see if this will fit on here. All right, so when I'm stamping, and I'm going to stamp an image, and I want to watercolor it, I want to make sure I use an ink that's going to be waterproof. So this is my favorite ink for stamping with when I want the image to be waterproof. It's the Versafine Clear ink. It is the best. It's my favorite, hands down, across the board. This is the ink that I use pretty much every day here at the shop. So I always ink it up from the back side, just tap on the ink. That way we don't over ink the stamp. And because my paper is kind of small, I'm just going to stamp right here so I can get the majority of my image here. All right, and then I want to let that dry for just a moment, because if you don't let it dry completely, then when you go to do your watercolors, the lines of course are going to move, and it's not going to look nearly as good. And then I'm also going to take a moment here while that is getting fully dried, and I'm going to cut out a little piece of black paper here. I know it will not be perfectly square there, but that's okay. And I'm actually going to stamp with my black ink on my black paper. I know, kind of a little bit back into our world of black from last week. We're going to stamp that down. And this ink is really interesting because it actually stays wet long enough you can actually do heat embossing with it. And I find myself doing heat embossing almost every week, but I am going to do it again, and I'm going to show you my little idea here. I'm going to get this plugged in real fast. And I'm actually going to use black embossing powder on my image. So black embossing powder, black stamp ink, black paper.
Yes.
And even though that image may have felt dry to the touch, it's amazing that the embossing powder will still stick to it. It's always very impressive. I'll start with that. Okay, great. All right, so now we have the same image stamped on the black paper and heat embossed and then just stamped in black on this white paper. Okay, so now we're just going to talk about some different watercolor ideas. So when I think of watercolor, I personally just think moves with water, right? It's a color that moves with water. Now, I was talking with a friend of mine about this, that she's a professional watercolor teacher, and she was telling me that yes, there are mediums that move with water, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're watercolor. Because watercolor, like in a watercolor palette, like this one here or my traditional one, they all have a binder in them, which makes them so that way you have the pigment, and then it will bond. The binder in it will help it bond to the paper. And so while there are inks that move with water, they are not considered a true watercolor unless there's a binder in it. And that was information that I didn't know, so I thought that was really very helpful for me. So I'm just going to start off with my standard watercolor one for coloring this image, and then we're going to go in and do some metallic watercolors in just a moment. So I have my little image here. What I usually do when I get started with watercolors is I take my little spray bottle of water and I spritz all of my watercolors ahead of time, and this makes it so that the colors are activated and ready to go. When you have a paintbrush and you dip it in water and then you add it into your watercolors and you move it around and then you go to watercolor, the colors are oftentimes diluted, they're really muted, they're just not as vibrant as you want them to be. So I will do this, so then that way when I go in to do my watercolor, my colors are going to be nice and vibrant right off the bat. And one of the other things I've learned is that when you're doing watercolors, if you have just one color and you lay down your color, oftentimes it lands kind of flat, or it's just kind of very basic. And so when I'm doing watercolors, this is just my personal opinion. I really like to work with laying down a light color and then picking a secondary color. This may be a shade or a couple shades darker in a direction, so yellow to orange, for example. And then I can add that into my shadows, and that just doing that adds a lot of dimension into your painting.
Starts to
Yeah, it just starts to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional and not just so flat, like a two-dimensional image. So you can really see right off the bat that we're already starting to see a little bit of color variation, even though it's just two colors. Now, I have people that ask me all the time, they're like, I just don't understand watercolors. So my suggestion for you is figuring out where the light comes from, because a lot of watercolor is adding and applying shadows, so then that way it looks a little bit more realistic. So when I'm drawing a painting like this or coloring a painting, I'm imagining my light coming in from this direction. So all of the tops of my petals where the light is going to be hitting first, those areas are going to be the lightest. And then the opposite side, down here from the underside, that's where the areas of my petals are going to be the darkest, because that's where the shadows are. So when we're working with watercolors, and I'm just going to quickly up here just show you this. You have, I always think about the rainbow here. So we have yellow and then orange. It's kind of a little bit more like a honey color. So we're going to go pick up a little more orange here. You have orange, and then that moves into red, right? And then you can kind of go into like your darker shades of red. Okay, so you can already see you have this kind of rainbow effect that's happening here, where your lightest form of yellow is really light yellow, and then as your shadow side of yellow, it's going to land in the orange, and the darkest shadow is going to actually land in the red. So I know that that's kind of a confusing thing, but you can see here I'm actually going to apply a little bit of red down here into my little shadow areas. And this is, again, just going to kind of help add just a little bit of dimension to my flowers here. Okay. So then as I start to kind of blend this out a little bit, then I'm kind of moving towards my shadow. And I'm going to end up painting, these are poppies, so I'm going to actually end up painting them kind of more in the orangey kind of colors. But I'm going to be kind of, as I'm heading towards my shadow line, kind of getting darker and darker. Okay. And so this is just going to help with kind of creating that kind of interesting kind of dimension. All right, so I'm just going to blend that out a little bit. And then when I'm doing my blending, so we just have like a really quick little flower here. So just a little bit of different colors here. So then I have had other people ask me like, well, what about if I have some light colors and then I want to add just a little bit of dark, like a little bit of, we're going to add a little bit of red into this here. So I'll lay down my lighter colors, and then I'm going to go into my little bit of a red color down here, and my petals down here. And then sometimes there's little lines on the page, which actually lends itself to as a guide for giving you an area for where you can put your shadows in. And I see I'm using my paintbrush and actually moving it around a little bit. And I will sometimes start with my lighter color, move it across the lighter color, and then move into the darker color. So that way I'm blending my light into my dark. Whereas if you were to take your brush and go from the dark into light, you're going to end up coloring your entire flower the same color. Okay, so I've only used just the orange and red, or I use some yellow, orange, and red to do this one. But you can just really see how it adds just so much more rather than just a really flat yellow. And I'm just going to do my really flat yellow down here so you can really see that it really does make a big difference when you're painting. Just makes it just look a little bit more fun. Okay. All right, and then since we're working in the same color family anyway, we might as well paint our little Monarch Butterfly here. And we'll just paint him all orange. And then you can take in your kind of orangey red and kind of go over these areas that are kind of dark, because again, it already is kind of lending itself and giving you as a little bit of a guide of, hey, this is where a shadow might be. And that is, again, it makes it just look a little bit more exciting by just adding a touch of that slightly darker color into that. Okay. All right, so you take the clip out. There you go.
Yes. Such fun doing that, isn't it?
It really is. And watercolor is probably one of my favorite go-to mediums because it's so easy and it's just really mindless. You can just apply a little bit of color. And what's wonderful about painting with watercolors is that it's very forgiving, and that if you mess up, you can just take your wet brush and go back over it and move the colors out a little bit. Or apply another color on top of it and blend them together. So it makes it really easy. Okay, so now I'm going to do my black on black design here. And I'm going to use my micro watercolors. So micro watercolors show up really beautifully on dark paper. And so I'm going to see if I can find my yellows in here. Oh, I'm going to spritz these just a little bit. With the micro watercolors, you really don't have to activate them as much, because even though there's hardly any paint coming off here, the color is so beautiful and vibrant. And when I have this embossed kind of look, I'm going to do this kind of artsy technique where I'm actually just kind of brushing across here, and it's going to actually act as a mask, because I'm just going to kind of do a wash as this background here. So your embossing is acting as a mask, and making it so that as you brush it across, then the image is revealed. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of do this kind of a thing. Just brush this on, and again up here as well. Now this is a totally different technique, whereas here with the first one, we really are concentrating on staying inside the lines and just watercoloring our image. Here, we're using watercolor, but we're revealing the image. And I think I actually talked about last week or a couple weeks ago about how this is a really great activity for kids. You could stamp and do some heat embossing on something and then give them a watercolor or medium to bring it to life, to see what's revealed. You can even use your own handwriting and heat emboss your own handwriting and do a similar kind of an idea. Then after you do your wash, then you can go in with some of these darker colors. And kind of go with this kind of purpley kind of color, and then I can kind of do a little bit more detail of painting my poppies here. So I'm just going to pick one color here. And again, it's just kind of making it so then your eye kind of lands on those, but you know that the background is just, it's just going to kind of make it so that the image is really revealed. But you can make it look a little bit more interesting by adding more colors in here. And I think I'm going to kind of pick up this kind of color a little bit, some kind of coppery kind of color. Just going to change the color just slightly here. Not sure there's a whole lot of difference with those two shades. And let's see what other color I want to use on my butterfly. Then we'll kind of go in this kind of reddy kind of color again. And we'll just apply a little bit onto our little butterfly there. And might as well add in some greens. Whoops, didn't clean my brush up very well. There we go. And then we'll just apply some greens here onto our stems. Again, when you're working with this kind of technique, you really don't have to be perfect, because it's really is more about just getting the color down and just revealing the image, but using the micro watercolors to bring it to life. But I just thought that was a really fun idea. And it's really interesting because you can see the same image in two totally different ways using different watercoloring techniques. So I just really love how that looks. It's really beautiful. It'll look really great on like a gold card base, for example. That would look really nice. Okay, so those are just some really quick ideas just to kind of get you started if you're not really familiar with watercolors or you don't feel as experienced using watercolors. All right. So now I'm actually going to do something totally different. I'm going to grab up my die cut machine here, and I'm going to grab some acetate and this new die cut that just came in. This is just a really cute heart set from Tailored Expressions. It's 2 hearts, they're 2 different sizes. I'm just going to go ahead and cut these out because they're really cute, really simple. So acetate is just a piece of thin plastic. Whoops, sorry guys, that's moving on you. It's just a piece of thin plastic here. So I'm going to lay that down on my die cut machine. I'm going to do my little heart die cuts, and we're going to go ahead and cut that out. Okay, so I have that little heart there. You guys can barely see that there. My little heart, and I have another little itty bitty one down there. So I have 2 little guys, and I'm actually going to cut this out one more time if I can get one more cut on here. Oh, just barely, but I think I can do it. All right. Perfect. We got 2 of each. Okay, I'll put the die cut machine away. Don't do that at the moment. So what we have here is we have our little die cut, little acetate pieces here, and they're pretty small. Then I'm going to get out my little strip of paper, my little bit of paper here, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use markers that move with water. And I'm actually going to start out with my Tombos because most people are familiar with our the Tombow markers. And I actually have 3 of those here, so we'll do these 3 colors. So I'm going to work kind of light to dark. So I'm going to, on my heart here, I'm actually going to color at the top, and then I'm going to color in the middle, and color at the bottom. All right. Then we can do a couple different things here. So first thing that we can do is we can actually take our bottle of water here, and I'm just going to spritz it. And then I'm just going to set that down right there. Just let that just kind of do its thing.
Face down?
I did it color side down, yeah. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this one. Okay. And I'm going And I'm gonna spritz it. And now on this one, actually I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna just flip this upside down here. Okay. All right, now this one on the other side should be done. Flip it up and you get this perfect little heart, but that acetate's actually bonding and kind of suctioning to the paper, and so you get that really cool, beautiful watercolor effect, but it's not going to really extend much outside of the little piece of acetate.
It's not been blended.
Yeah, isn't that really cool? And it's kind of blended. This one was a little bit more wet on the bottom there, but eventually it will sink into the paper, so it should be okay. But I thought that was so fun and so cute. Isn't that fun? But then you end up with this leftover little pieces of acetate that you can use for a variety of things, which is just like a little cute idea. But then we're going to do the same kind of thought, but we're actually going to mask this off a little bit. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually spritzing my little hearts, and then I'm going to stick them down so they're kind of suctioned to the paper here. I'm just doing the little mini ones here.
I never thought of that.
We're going to see how this goes. And then I'm actually going to take my markers here. I'm just going to color on my craft mat here. I'm going to make a whole puddle here of color. And I'm just going to do my little splatter effect here. All around. And I'm going to add just as much as I possibly can in terms of ink here, so they get a really nice saturated background here. And we're going to actually see how this works. I think this will go the way I want, but I'm not 100% certain. So we're gonna see how this goes. That's kind of the fun part about doing demo, is that you don't always know what you're gonna get, but you know, you might learn something, or you might learn what not to do. And so I'm mostly trying to focus on getting right around that. All right, now I'm just gonna take my paper towel here and just press this down. Just pull off any excess water, and then let's see if my masking worked. Oh, only kinda. That's okay, not a problem. We'll just keep trying.
Well, just a little bit of moisture came under.
Yep. I think it might have been just a bit too much moisture there. Yes, I'll move my little hearts. There we go. Not a problem. Doesn't always work, and that's okay. All right. Now we'll go on to our next little idea here. Okay, so then my other thought on that, and that same kind of idea, with our little hearts, is I'm going to get another little piece of paper here. Oh, my tiny pieces of paper are gone. That's okay. This is actual true watercolor paper here. One side has a bit of a duckled edge on that. That's okay. Okay. Now what I think I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to do those two. This one, oh, there's a tiny little one there. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do on these, I'm going to actually use my Karen markers now because they are extremely juicy. I'm just going to use a couple colors. I'll use my metallics. All right. So now, once again, I'm going to color directly onto my little hearts here. And like I said, these are very, very juicy. Then I'm going to actually get out my die cut machine again. And I think this is a technique that actually I had learned from Kathy Fisted. She actually was the one, she was like, oh, you know, you can actually take your your stencils and actually run them through your die cut machine, and it will transfer any ink off of them onto your paper. So I'm actually going to try that. So I stuck my watercolor images directly onto my paper. Again, because they have the ink on there, they're actually suctioned to the paper. I'm going to lay that on my machine here. I'm going to run it through, and we're going to see what happens. So it's just a pressure system that's happening here. I just wanted to see what it would do. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So it actually removed the ink off of there. So it's not as like a beautiful as ombre as earlier because we had spritzed that ahead of time, but you still get that kind of impression. And what's actually really cool is it's actually slightly debossed, it's slightly pressed in, which I thought was kind of an interesting kind of an idea. So anyways, you can kind of see the differences there with the two different styles. Okay, now we'll move on to another idea. Okay. Just cleaned up here. Yeah, it really turned out really, really nice. I really like that. Okay. So now, oh, and then I also had my little reverse pieces, the pieces that were left over here.
Oh, yes.
So we'll take those. I'm just going to lay those down on my paper here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to trace right inside with this marker here, because this marker moves with water. I'm going to do the little one too. So really acting more as a guide. Okay. And then my water brush. And these markers, actually, there's a technique that you can actually do with them. It's called the tip-to-tip technique. So in the middle of my heart here, I'm actually just going to color a little bit of dark blue. And you can actually take the dark blue and color it onto the pink. And then you actually use that to kind of get that color that kind of comes back out to pink. It's really, really interesting. So the pen is actually self-cleaning is what they call it. So eventually it will go back to pink, but this helps kind of get that blend from one color into the other. It is really, really interesting. And then to clean my brush off, I just coloring on a piece of paper until it comes back to pink, which is amazing. Okay, we're gonna come back to this in just a second. All right, so then I take my water brush, and there's just water in here, there's no color or anything. And then I can just take these and just move this, and it's just gonna blend those together. Colors here. And actually, I think personally, I'm actually going to take some of this pink here and color it onto my craft mat so I can get a bit more pink, get a bit more pigment here. Kind of use that to blend my colors out a little bit more. And then we'll do this guy too. And what's kind of fun is that dark blue heart in the middle, you can actually still see it a little bit, which is kind of cool. But yeah, working on a cold pressed paper, you kind of get that really nice blend of colors, and it's really much easier to do. And then I'm the kind of person I always like to finish up my little bit of art with a little bit of splatter, just because it just kind of makes it look a little bit more fun, a little bit more different. So yeah, so that's kind of just who I am. So, but yeah, just another little technique for you. I'm just making little hearts. I'm doing lots of hearts right now because it's on my mind. We have Valentine's Day coming up, and so I've just been, there's a lot of heart things that have been showing up here at the shop recently. Okay. All right, so then, let's see here. I have this other little image here. Uh-oh, that's something. Oh, look at my scissors. Something fell. Okay, so this is a cute little fox stamp. This is by Lawn Fawn. It's a really cute little image. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to stamp him down. And then this is one of my favorite drawing pens ever. This is, and I may have demonstrated this for you when I was doing my pen demo a couple weeks ago. This is called the Fudenosuke brush pen. And what's cool about this pen is that when you're drawing with it, it's actually totally waterproof when dry. So with a light hand, you get a thinner line, and with a heavy hand, you get these thicker lines. And so I'm going to just take a moment here. I'm just drawing some cute little balloons here. Okay. I'll just draw little bottoms of our little balloons. But this pen dries immediately, but it's also totally waterproof. But it is my go-to favorite drawing pen, hands down. It's just absolutely wonderful. Then I'm going to get out my watercolors again. And I'm going to show you a different watercoloring medium that you can work with. So,
is this Versafine Ink again?
Oh yeah, I had used the Versafine Clear ink to stamp my image, and then the Fudenosuke pen to draw my little lines for my little balloons. Now, this is an ink that you can do watercoloring techniques with, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and just take a moment, and I'm just going to swoosh them out onto my craft mat here. So these inks are dye-based, which means that they actually move with water, and that's kind of their thing. That's why they exist, is because they move with water, okay? And so then what we can do here is we can just pick up our color, and then we can kind of paint our balloons. I'm going here and just paint these. And so what's cool about this is that then you can stamp your images in the same color ink, and it's going to be that really cool kind of tone on tone. So if you had like stamped your images, or you had stamped a sentiment in this color ink, then you can use it for doing the watercoloring as well, which is really, really cool. So then everything really kind of matches nicely together. And I'm going to do a cute little heart balloon here, I think. So you can kind of draw with it here just slightly. Just going to pick up my colors here and my balloons. Okay. And then we're going to do some blue here. And this blue is going to probably land behind this one. Whoops. Went outside my imaginary line here. And then pick up a couple other colors here. This periwinkle color that I just invented. Mixing my colors, and then we'll do a little bit of a little pink balloon over here. So sometimes when you're doing watercoloring, like from a watercolor palette, you end up with a finish, and I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I have this one watercolor palette. It was very inexpensive, and so therefore it kind of paints very inexpensively, but when you're done, you kind of run your hand over the top and it feels almost chalky. It's a really bizarre texture. It's not really my favorite watercolor palette to work with, but what I did notice is that when I tried to take my pen on top of it and do line work, I really couldn't do it, because what was happening was because of the chalky surface, it was actually ruining my pen. Okay. So what's cool about this is that because it is an ink, of course I have to wait for this to dry, but then once it's dry, it's going to be more flat, and so you're still going to have that porous surface of your paper. So then you can take your black pen, you can actually go over it and add lining and things on top of it, which we are going to do in just a moment. So I'm waiting for that to just dry. So while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to clean this up, and then I'm going to paint my little fox. Okay. And since I didn't grab an orange Distress ink, I'm actually going to use just my standard watercolor palette here. And once again, I'm kind of thinking about where the light might be coming in from, so then that way when I'm painting my little fox guy, I want to make sure I get my colors accurate. So much like before, I'm going to use two different shades. I'm going to use two different shades of orange here, my lighter orange and my darker orange. I'm going to go ahead and just paint that down, and I'm not going to be painting the white of the tail or the little white of his stomach. And I can never remember the face. Is it the white stripe is on the top of the face? Do you remember with the fox?
Oh, the white is around the eyes.
The white is around the eyes? Okay, all right, so the top of the face will be orange.
Kind of like a cat.
Okay, thank you. I can never remember when it comes to...
Yeah.
This is correct? Okay,
that's correct.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I almost had it wrong. It's so funny.
That's
all right,
it.
there we go. That definitely looks better. It looks accurate. I feel like if I had painted it wrong, then that would have thrown me off. So then you just take in and adding in your shadow lines. So I'm sticking this on the left side, again, where my light is coming in. The top of his face is going to be the lightest color, and then the back side where his ear is, the back side of his tail here, the bottom of his foot, underneath his stomach here, and behind his arm, those are all going to be the darker oranges. So then I'm going to move from my lighter orange into my darker colors. So when you move your light to the dark, then you're not accidentally pulling that darker color out into the lighter color. And so you'll see that I'm actually cleaning off my brush quite a bit in between, because I don't want that darker color to really stay on my brush as I'm trying to blend in those lighter colors. So I will oftentimes, I remember when I was first doing watercolors, Wendy mentioned to me, she was like, oh, I always have a paper towel available. And I was like, well, that's weird. But then I realized, so you can clean out your water brush, so you can pick out those colors, so then you can easily clean off that darker color so you can go in with your lighter colors. Okay. All right, and since I'm having my colors up here, and since I've been working with my palette here, just so you know, I was actually using my Distress inks to paint these. I squished them on my craft mat. So I'm going in with my watercolors here, and I'm actually just going to add in some shadow lines, some just slightly darker, since I have these colors available here. Clean that out. And then I'm going to go with my darker shade here, my purple, and then go with slightly darker shade there. All right. So now, again, that's kind of giving you that idea of kind of your light and dark. And then once again, I'm moving from my light colors into my darker colors just to get that blend together. And then in case you guys are wondering, this paper I'm using here is the 110 pound, because that way I don't get that warping, but it stays really nice and sturdy. And so it's the 100, and it will hold the water. So this is 110 pound solar white cardstock. Okay. All right, so now that I've laid those down, let's give you just a little bit of grass along the bottom of our image here, so it's not just floating into the ether here. There we go. All right, and I guess might as well throw in a couple of these balloons. Flying up quite high with the little balloons here. And then we're just going to kind of do some quick little cloudy kinds of things in here. Wow, that's not a very good cloud, but that's okay. We're just gonna throw in some sky elements up here. Again, we're just gonna kind of quickly throw this together here. I might go in with like my cloud stunts or something later and actually add some more stuff in here, but at least for the time being, we'll just kind of add some sky. So when you take your watercolors and kind of do just kind of, this right here, what I'm doing at the moment this is called a wash, where you just take your watercolor and just brush it all the way across here. So, and normally when I'm doing a wash, I usually try to use a much larger brush, but we're just gonna, I'm just being kind of quick here with just the time being, just because I'm kind of just trying to create just a little sky idea here. I'm gonna do some little dry brush things. Okay. All right. Okay, I know it's not perfect, but that's okay. We're just getting the effect down. Okay. All right. So then we'll go in with my Food No Suki now, and then I'm gonna actually just line out my balloons a little bit. You can see you can easily just draw right on top of your watercolors, which is really wonderful because then you can go in and you can add your little details. Or in this case, I'm actually wanting to write, you know, like a little message on here. Happy day. So then you can do that. And again, the lines aren't going to go anywhere, but you can really get a nice impression on top of your watercolor there. Anyways, I thought that was kind of cute. And just to finish this off, I'm just going to add some little dot groupings kind of here and there. Again, it's not perfect, but that's okay. Just to kind of give you an idea. But hey, isn't that cute? So I thought that was pretty fun. Again, kind of using your ink pads in a different way there. And again, it's really great because you can stamp your sentiment using the same colors. So there you have that. Also, Jay, you missed this earlier, but look how amazing this is. Isn't that so cool? We colored on a piece of the little acetate hearts with the markers, and then I spritzed them with water, and then I just dropped them on here with ink down, and it held that color in place, which I was so pleased with. And that one, oh my gosh, I'm so pleased.
Goodness.
Isn't that cool?
Awesome. Just color with watercolors and
Gorgeous.
watercolors are such fun.
Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a quick little die cut here. So-
She put it on acetate and put it face, splashed it with water and then put it face down.
I love how this one's a little fudgy edge.
Now that one she did, and my chicken
So
hit the
this is a die cut set from Memory Box, and it's called Sea Creatures, and they're really, really cute, but they're kind of a little bit more basic. So this is a great example for doing a quick little watercolor, especially if you have die cuts that you've already cut out, and you're like, but how do I make them look better? You know, because sometimes, you know, this would be a really great die cut set if you wanted to just cut your die cuts out of black paper, and then they could just be the silhouettes. But let's say you want these to really be a focal point on your card. So we're going to go ahead and cut these out. Again, I'm cutting these out of 110 Solar White cardstock here. Whoops. That was loud. All right. So we have a seal, I believe that's what that is. Some little sharks, some little stingrays, and sea turtle. All right, so pretty cute little images here. All right, so this is a really great way to kind of just do a little bit of watercoloring. So what we're gonna do here, whoops. There we go. Oh, I'm getting low on water. Jay, would you mind if I use that for you? Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get out my watercolor palette here. And then I'm also going to show you about watercoloring with Distress Oxides. So Distress Oxide inks are inks that I love to work with. I'm just going to squish it out on my ink pad, on my craft mat there. The thing is with Distress Oxide inks is they show up on black paper and they show up on white paper. But when it comes to the oxides, their colors are just really, really vibrant. They're absolutely beautiful. So we're just going to pick up some of the color here. Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate that. All right. So I'm going to actually start out here with my color here. And I'm just going to show you, and I'm just going to color on my little seashell here. What's really cool about these die cuts is they actually kind of give you a little bit of a guide for coloring in. And because I like to have kind of a tone on tone kind of a look with these, I'm only going to be coloring just a little bit of individual little dots. And then I'm actually going to dilute this out to make this even lighter color. And then I'm going to just go in here again and add some slightly lighter shades. So then you kind of get that light and kind of dark colors together. Thank you. Okay. And I'm just going to kind of blend these down. And some kind of light and dark shades. It's a little bit
turtle shell.
Yeah, and so it's just kind of a little bit more kind of muted here. And then I'm just going to take my wash of these and just kind of do the background. So the background shell is lighter, but it adds like kind of a little bit more kind of dimension to that, and just kind of makes it look a little bit more interesting. Look at my little turtle shell there.
I've never used I've got them, but I haven't used them for watercolor.
Yeah, but you can, and I just think that's really cool the way that they're formatted, because all Distress brand inks, they all move with water, and so it's always kind of a cool thing to kind of think about and be like, oh, if I need that certain color, I can do watercolors with it to match those colors, like if you've done a card. And then again down here, I'm just going to kind of do his little feet and his little cheek on his little jowls there, his face. And then I'm just going to do the lighter color for all the rest. His little feet down here. And then just run this across here. All right. So then when you lay this on here, you get that separation of that lighter green from the wash, but then you have your little turtle shell as well. So, and we'll wait for these to dry before we officially put them together here. But you can really see how that turtle really comes to life once you've added on the little watercolor, which I thought was kind of cute. Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and then we're just going to go back into my plain old watercolors here for doing the rest of my little images. So we'll do this little seal guy. So I'm going to add in some kind of shadow marks, like maybe around like his tail, and maybe like his little fins, and maybe his like nose. And then I'm going to just make a little kind of a guide for where his eye might be, maybe in here somewhere. No, it's not perfect, but that's okay. And then I'm going to use the lighter gray now, and then we're just going to kind of do a quick little wash on here. And because my gray is not quite as dark as I would like it to be, I'm going to pick up just a tiny little bit of my darker gray, and you can actually mix your colors together. So you can have a little bit of light gray and a little bit of dark gray together to kind of mix, so that way you're kind of meeting the color where it's at. So you can add actually quite a bit of dimension onto your little seal by just adding a tiny little bit of watercolor. So you can make him look a little bit more realistic looking. And then we're going to do the same thing with our Stingray here. So I'm not even sure what colors
gray.
They are gray. Okay.
Yeah, they're gray.
Kind of gray, maybe like gray green, maybe even.
Kind of a gray, kind of lighter and darker. It's kind of silvery. So, well,
yeah.
They're darker and lighter, depending on underneath. They're gonna look darker.
Yeah, underneath they're a little bit darker. Okay,
Yeah.
so maybe what I'll do then is I'll maybe add like a little bit of black just right along that edge, and maybe like into the tail, because as we lay this down, it's going to kind of land a little bit more on the slightly darker gray side.
Yeah.
And then they have eyes, kind of.
Yeah, they would. I'm trying to think. I don't get to see them too much. But
Yeah, I think I'm going to throw in some eyes here.
Yeah, they need
and
eyes.
make him work.
They need eyes.
he needs something there. Yep. And then we'll do the same thing with our little shark. Oh, and sharks are pretty much dark blue.
Well, gray actually.
Oh
They're
yes,
sharp.
they land really
Gray.
more gray rather than. Oh my gosh, all of these creatures are gray.
Yeah, they are.
A lot of gray here. Well, how about we'll do a gray blue?
Okay.
Make it look at least not so boring. And then this underside of the sharks, they really are more. They're white.
Light colored. Yes.
Yes, light colored.
Think of the great white.
Yes.
White underneath.
Oh yes. Okay, great. All right. Yeah, great.
Yeah, starting from the mouth right on down that tummy. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Perfect.
I think of all the documentaries I've seen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we'll do a little bit of maybe light gray along his belly there,
Yeah.
and we'll do some slightly darker.
And some of them are almost blackish colored, like the ones we have out here, killer whale.
Oh, okay,
Like
yeah.
the killer whales, they're very dark. And
Yeah.
They have white underneath.
We have. I remember growing up, we would fish out here, and I remember the first time we ever caught a dogfish, because they're a shark, you know,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
they're
yeah.
this small little
Yeah.
thing, and so my dad was like, "Well, do you want to see what it tastes like?" And we're like, "Yeah," as kids, and it's just, I don't know if you've ever had shark. It's straight cartilage, the whole thing. There's not a lot of flavor. All right, but then we have our little shark guy here, and then we have our couple little sharks in here. Yeah, it was just really funny. I remember my brother and I were both like, "Ooh, these are gross." It's so funny. All right. we'll paint our little shark here. We'll kind of create kind of an eye there of some
Yeah,
kind.
I have the eyes on the side, yeah.
Yep. And then you can kind of go in here and kind of create some of that kind of dimension here by adding just some darker little areas. Okay, all right. And then we'll do the same thing with our little stingray over here. And once again, kind of in that gray tone. And we'll pick up a bit more black. And we'll do this little tail.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. So, but you can really see how you can really create a totally different effect with your die cuts by just adding some color and just kind of creating those in different ways. So again, I'll go back in and glue that down once it's fully dried, but then you can really see how your little sea creatures really totally change when they're not just plain old white, you know, or making them more interesting than when they're just plain black. So, but yeah, so you got your little creatures there. So I thought those were fun. Just showing these to the camera here so anybody watching can see. Wow, but I just realized a lot of those little creatures are pretty much in the grays. But yeah, you're welcome to ship those there. All right. Okay. All right, so then, I'll just look at my ideas here. All right, so we're just gonna do one more little idea here for you. Okay. Put this up here.
These are cut out of the heavier.
Yeah, those are kind of under the 110-pound solar weight, just because when you add so much water in them, you really don't want them to curl up so much, because they definitely will. Okay, so now on my last little piece of white paper here, once again, I'm going to stamp out my little image here, and I'm actually going to do this out of clear, so I'm going to clean this off really fast. There we are. Okay. So this technique, again, you can use like your Versamark pen as a really fun technique to do this with, but it's also just a really great idea, kind of similar fashion as our black card earlier. So we're going to kind of do a similar kind of idea that we did here. But what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to stamp it with clear ink. This is the Versamark ink pad.
Okay, here's a, okay.
And then we're going to stamp this out on our paper here. And then just because I want to make this, I know it doesn't look as clear at the moment just because there was a little bit of color still on my paper here. And I'm just going to clean this off. Again. And then just because I want to make this look at least kind of different than the other image, so it's not just so obvious, it's the exact same image stamped again. I've inked this up, but I have not inked up the butterfly.
Oh yes.
And so you can actually take, if you feel like you might have accidentally got ink on there, where are my scissors? You can actually take a little piece of paper or piece of acetate and actually block out that stamp so it doesn't stamp even if you think you've got ink on it, and then you can stamp this down. I'm just going to stamp this down.
Right to it.
Yeah. And so just a little piece of acetate will stick right directly to that stamp there. You can pull that there. Okay. And now I'm just going to use clear embossing powder and I'm going to heat set it. So this is my clear embossing powder here. Across the whole thing. Now the butterfly, of course, the ink was a little bit darker, so this effect is not going to be as clear, but you can still see the idea. I'm going to heat set that. So it's going to be kind of hard to see at the moment, but we're going to have clear ink on this white paper. You can also do the same idea with white embossing powder on the white paper. Okay, so now, okay, so then we can take, oh yeah, go ahead, you put that right underneath there.
Okay, there we go.
Perfect.
This one's a little dampish.
Oh, that's okay. Oh, that's all right, it's not a problem. Okay, so now I'm just going to take my watercolors here. I'll just clean off any of this black ink that's on here. And then I'm just going to watercolor my image, but I'm going to be kind of messy, and I'm going to be kind of messy on purpose. I'm actually going to spritz these to get those ready for me. And then I'm just going to watercolor here. But what's happening here is that it's the embossing powder is actually acting as a mask.
Yes.
So then you can just kind of do your little watercolors here. And then you can kind of just brush that across. So you kind of get that kind of more artistic kind of a look. And then once again, you can kind of go in here and add your details for watercoloring your little poppy image here. And so what's nice about this kind of a technique is that you really don't have to worry so much about coloring inside the lines, because the embossing powder is actually going to hold, it's going to create the lines for you, and it's actually going to hold that watercolor inside the lines, which is again just really, really cool. And you can see here how I didn't do a wash around it, so it's really hard to see the dimension on that. So that's why I like to have that background, just so that way it's a little bit more separation, and it's much easier to see where that image is than to see the entire image there. So that's why it's kind of cool to kind of be a little bit messy sometimes in creating this kind of idea, because you do get that really kind of interesting effect there. And it kind of looks a little bit kind of like a sunset background, which is also really neat. And so we'll just continue here and kind of just do some on the side here. Kind of revealing our images as we're going here. That kind of yellow color. And then I'll just go into a brighter yellow. And then since my butterfly was the darkest of all of that we had colored here, that effect is not going to look as good with the wash around it, because you can already see the lines. So we'll just go in here and we'll just cover this little guy. And then we'll kind of do this kind of a thing, and that will kind of give that same kind of idea. Won't be as intense. All right, so kind of an interesting kind of idea, but it's a little bit more artistic. But then you can just do a wash kind of background, and then you kind of you reveal that image. So, and there we have it. I know it's kind of hard for you guys to see up there. I might actually need to add in some darker colors so that it's a little bit more obvious what's going on here. So the darker the color, the more contrast you're going to see here. Oh, my paper's starting to pill because I've applied just a bit too much water to it. And that's something that does happen if you don't have a cold pressed watercolor paper, which this is not. This is just solar white, so when you're doing a wet on wet technique, the paper will pill over a period of time after you've applied a little bit too much water. All right, and then just for my butterfly, I'm just gonna get some darker colors in here. And we'll do some darker colors down here. There we go. And that way we have really nice heavy contrast here. Alright. So there we have our little watercolor technique. Yes, I thought that was pretty fun. That was really pretty.
Yes.
Alright. And I think that I think I'm gonna go ahead and stop there for my quick watercolor techniques demo. And I hope that you guys had fun and hope you learned some stuff. I think I'm definitely gonna play around with that concept a little bit more, because it's just a really cool idea. And I bet you can do something kind of similar with other stencils, doing something same kind of idea. That idea didn't go as well as I was hoping, but that's okay. Sometimes that's just the way that things go. And then my little guy down here. So, but yeah, again, it's just kind of ideas just to kind of inspire.